So let me start. So I have a lot of things to say about Qualia, and especially here in this talk, I want to uh, sort of discuss the potential of using the notion of symmetry and group and also principal bundle to characterize Qualia. So this is also motivated to assess whether AI systems have any Qualia-like experience. But of course, we don't know the definite answer. But at least I'm trying to present some mathematical tools and also some background information. Okay, so I don't know if everyone's familiar with the problem of consciousness called the hard problem. So the gist of this philosophical problem is why does the physical interactions in the brain give rise to conscious experience? So we can analyze how the brain converts the input through the retina and then process it. And we can describe all the computations in terms of objective reality, but somehow this has some sort of corresponding experience. And so this is the question of the consciousness. And some people think it's not the real problem, but this has been very puzzling to many of us. But in this talk, I want to address more specific problem, which is this the Qualia type problem. So when we hear something, our auditory cortex is activated, and then a lot of information processing happens there. And also for visual information, a lot of things happen in the visual cortex. But when you look at individual neurons, but they are just neurons, but somehow they lead to very different types of experience. So when something stimulates the auditory cortex, we hear sounds, but we don't see sounds. And then so what determines the quality of experience? So that's the main question I want to address in this talk. And to think about this kind of consciousness problems, I've been claiming that we need a theory that is universal. And then this universality is defined as here. So universality is a property of a theory, the theory of consciousness. And the theory has this universality if it can determine whether a given dynamical system is conscious, irrespective of its origin or composition. So, for example, let's say if some theory says prefrontal cortex corresponds to consciousness, but then we cannot apply that theory to computers because we don't know which part of computer corresponds to the prefrontal cortex. So we want to define the origin of consciousness in terms of the sort of property of a dynamical system. So I've written about this in this paper. But another important property I want to mention is this intrinsicality principle. So I asked what determines visual experience versus auditory experience, and then that needs to be completely determined by the characteristics of the underlying substrate that generates the conscious experience. So yeah, so basically, so for example, we can present some image to a human subject and then look at the brain activation, and then you might find some neurons respond to color red, but that's from a kind of extrinsic perspective. So the answer, and but we need a theory that tells us which neurons generate the experience of redness, so independent of the observer. So that's the question. So that's the gist of this intrinsicality principle. Okay, so back to this problem, and so in a way, answering the question of what determines the quality of experience seems as difficult as a hard problem, because it seems like it's very difficult to do experiments about qualia in animal models. But I want to show you this classic study that showed that this is some sort of qualia experiment in animals. And so in this paper from the group at MIT, they rewired the input to the retina to project into the auditory cortex. So normally, like visual input goes to LGN and goes to visual cortex, but in this animal, they rewired half of the visual fields into the auditory cortex. Instead of going to visual cortex, they kind of rewired input to the auditory cortex. So what happened was they found that connectivity pattern in the rewired auditory cortex became like the connectivity pattern in the visual cortex. And also that they showed physiologically that they also showed like similar response patterns as normal visual neurons in primary visual cortex. So basically, after rewiring, this animal sort of learn to capture some sort of structure in vision in the auditory cortex. But what was interesting in this work was that they asked whether the animal sees the stimulus through this rewired auditory cortex, or since this stimulus activates the auditory cortex, they might hear the sound. Hear the stimulus as sound. So that seems like a difficult question to ask an animal to answer. But interestingly, what they found was they first trained the animal to distinguish whether the stimulus was a flash of light or a sound using the intact part of the retina. But later, after the training is complete, they flash the light to the wired part of the retina, and then the big question is whether the animal reported the stimulus as light or sound, and then the result was that they reported light. So combined with this kind of anatomical or physiological data, it seems like what determines the quality of experience doesn't seem to be which part of the brain is activated, but instead it's determined by the internal sort of connectivity structure, which captures, which learn to capture the kind of statistical patterns in the stimulus. So that's the kind of background empirical interesting result. And so but eventually, so this is kind of repetition of the intrinsicality principle, which is like when we encounter some like an AI system or some alien brain, we want to know whether they generate visual experience or auditory experience based on their anatomy or some sort of information structure. So so we want but it's difficult to do in real brain. So we wanted to do whether we can find such patterns in artificial systems. So but this is kind of a simplified version of the kind of AI experiment we did. So we for many audio tasks or for many visual tasks, we trained a very simple neural network to sort of represent those stimuli. And so then after training, for each neural network, you get some sort of weight and bias and so on. And so, but for the same set of classification task, this is one kind of sound classification task, and there are many different kinds of like speech classification or instrument classification and things like that. And then for each task, we trained a few hundred of neural networks. Then every time we get like different weight patterns and so on. And then we use as a kind of second order meta network to predict on which task the network was trained on. So this is a way to see like whether there's some sort of common pattern that in the weight structure after training on a specific task. So the idea is, we wanted to see whether, the weight structure had some information about, whether the task was like audio stimuli or like the visual discrimination tasks. So that's the gist. Of course, this doesn't tell us whether, we have no, this doesn't tell us exactly like what kind of structure we are looking at, but at least, with this kind of data-driven experiment, now we can test whether there's some sort of like a structure that's specific to visual or auditory tasks. And so to do that, maybe you don't know what autoencoders are, but we constructed something like meta autoencoder. So we wanted to use a neural network as the input, and then just like normal autoencoder, this network can reconstruct the input network. So that way you can sort of embed neural networks. So this is one way to create some sort of like higher order representation. So you get kind of the space of neural networks. It's just like a function space in math. And so this is more technical details. So we had to do a little bit more complicated things for technical reasons. But the gist is that we embedded many trained neural networks. And what we found was that so basically in the latent space of this meta network, we find clear separation between neural networks trained on auditory tasks shown in orange and those trained on visual tasks. So it seems like there's a kind of fundamental difference between visual neural networks and auditory visual networks. And then there's, but our kind of speculation is that that kind of structure corresponds to sort of differences in subjective experiences for like, sound and vision. And then this is the confusion matrix. So basically it shows there might be something specific to individual like class of stimuli, but broadly speaking, like you have a big separation between vision versus audition. So that's the kind of empirical work. And also, this is a kind of a side note, but so in this experiment, we assume that all the information is in the weights. But we thought it was kind of interesting way to think about kind of higher order representation of neural networks, and that also gives us some idea about how to interpret theory called higher order theory of consciousness. So the idea is, so there are many different versions of higher order theories, but the gist is we become conscious of a stimulus if we have a higher order representation that says like we have a representation in the system. So there must be like some sort of higher order sort of representation. But it's been a little bit sort of unclear to me what it means to have a higher order representation. And so so for example, like when you think about like a very simple feed-forward neural networks, like every layer seems to be a meta representation of the previous layer. If you take a very simplistic definition of representations, because when you take a neural network, some sort of output layer is called a representation of the input. But then if you use the output from one layer as an input to another, it just goes on, and everything is a representation of representation, and it goes on. But this looks kind of too simplistic. But also, there's a kind of tradition in cognitive neuroscience to take confidence rating as a kind of metacognition of the first order representation. But on the other hand, when you do like object classification and things like that with deep learning, it's very common to take softmax to compute something like confidence, and so this seems like too trivial to implement. So in that sense, the example of embedding of functions can be interpreted as meta representation, because this gives us something qualitatively different. So that's kind of interesting. But also, yeah, so here I'm kind of mixing like two sort of positions. So one is that like when I introduce this embedding approach to distinguish visual versus auditory experiences, I took the kind of the property of neural networks as the kind of fundamental determinant of experience. But on the other hand, like for this meta representation, like if we think this meta representation needs to exist explicitly in the brain to distinguish visual versus auditory experience. Yeah, so there's another some part of the brain needs to learn this kind of relationship. So, but that's another story. But I think those are equally plausible. So yeah, but I'm not going too much into detail about this. Yeah. So from here, I want to talk a little bit more about symmetry. And so recently we wrote a preprint. So like it has like a lot of details. So but in this talk, I want to give you an overall gist of this idea. So so here I want to introduce the concept called equivariance. So so in the meta network experiment, we couldn't tell what kind of structure is fundamental for visual neural networks or auditory neural networks. And our hypothesis is that probably depending on the sensory modality, neural networks need to learn different types of equivariance, or maybe in neuroscience context, it's more common to talk about invariance, but equivariance is slightly more generalized version of that. And so the idea is something like this. So for like visual stimuli, when you move the object, let's say to the right, the cat is still the same cat. So there's something invariant here. But equivariance is defined for this encoder. So let's say you have one neural network that's some sort of like contour detection. And so you convert this image into this image. But equivariance means if you first encode and translate, you get the same result as first translate and then encode. So you have these two like pathways, but if they correspond to each other, you preserve the structure. So that's called equivariance. But of course, for like visual images, you have this kind of equivariance for scaling or translation or a little bit of rotation. And so yeah, so there are some set of groups that are kind of characteristics of visual images. But on the other hand, for auditory experiences, you may have like more different types of equivariances. So but for example, let's say the input is kind of Fourier transformed version of the time series signal. Then you have some sort of power map, but if you rotate that, you get completely different sound. So in that sense, you have kind of different structure for vision and audition. And okay, so the idea is that maybe the difference in qualia between vision and audition comes from the fact that corresponding neural networks learned different equivariance structure. So that's the hypothesis. And formally, this equivariance is described like this. So basically, this is you first take the input and then apply this kind of action from certain group, and then apply this F is a neural network or encoder, which is the same thing as first encode and then translate. So that's the concept of equivariance. And so this equivariance is defined for many different kinds of groups. Yeah, but if we identify those groups for a neural network, you can sort of decompose the space of representation or space of the neural activation patterns. And so there's something called like a principal bundle, and it's basically it's a way to sort of divide the total space into fiber and the base space. And in terms of neural network, you have total space. That's the it could be just sort of neural activation patterns in one layer. And then assuming that the encoder for that network has some sort of like a symmetry, G, and then you can decompose this total space in terms of the quotient space or fibers or orbits. So I'll give you more details about this, but the idea is by using the kind of framework of principal bundle, you can decompose neural networks representation space in terms of group and also orbits and so on. Okay, so and also like this kind of decomposition gives us more kind of like more refined ideas about qualia. So for example, as I said, we assume that visual and auditory qualia come from like different kind of symmetry groups. And so first you need to find some group that makes the network equivariant. So maybe for a certain type of qualia, you have like you have one structure, and maybe for some other neural network, you have like different kind of groups. And so at high level, the modality of qualia comes from these differences in symmetry groups. So that's the kind of high level sort of distinction. And the second level is from the mathematical notion of orbits, which we call qualia attributes. So basically, if you take one representation, let's say this y, corresponding to the representation of a dog placed in the center, and then when you translate this image or representation of the dog along this group defining this equivariance, then you get like many different you have different specific representation of the dog, but they are at different locations. So here, like I'm assuming this group is a translation symmetry, and so basically you take just one point, and then everything that keeps the kind of identity or specific content of this image, this representation, is the orbit of this dog. So that's the idea. And so basically, we call it attributes because in this space, basically the point in this space corresponds to like a very specific attribute, which is the position of this dog. And then the same thing is defined for a cat and so on. Yeah, but then you can take the quotient space, which is kind of represented by this axis. So basically, if you divide this total space by the group or orbit, basically in this quotient space, like each point corresponds to like one orbit like this. So basically this space corresponds to or include all different sort of animals or like all different object categories or something like that. So that's the idea. So you can decompose the representation space to this orbit and quotient space. And so we call it Qualia signature. It's a kind of tentative name, but yeah. Okay. So to summarize, the first distinction is the Qualia modality. So that comes from differences in symmetry group. And then Qualia attribute corresponds to the orbits I mentioned. So this is the kind of specific attributes which changes along the kind of transformation in the group. And the Qualia signature is kind of different things. So basically the quotient space. So it might be a little bit confusing and it might be too trivial who know this kind of math, but the idea is that we can sort of use this kind of framework to think about or characterize the kind of quality of neural networks, and I feel like we can actually use this kind of idea to make distinctions about like different qualia. So that's the main idea, and but once you formulate like neural networks this way, it has some like useful predictions. So the first one is the rigidity of orbits, and then the second thing is plasticity of quotient space. So basically, the main idea is orbits are kind of topologically the same as the input space, and then they should be consistent across individuals. But actually, like, mathematically, like you can prove these things. But basically, the first two proposition sets. Okay, so now if you have a kind of representation, kind of defined by this G equivariance, basically, this orbit should be maintained. So basically, these orbits are kind of diffeomorphic to each other, and then of course across the individuals, like everything has this kind of same topology as the input space. So people should have the same topological structure. So that's a kind of one interesting implication. And there's some additional things, so which is more technical, but then the idea is when I didn't like explain this kind of sign rule, but but the point is maybe this might be easier. So if the group representation is orthogonal, so basically it preserves the like distance and in this space, like when you do the transformation along the orbits, if that group representation is also going basically people have also like very similar and orbits, and the difference would be only up to like uniform scaling. So it's a more technical thing. But on the other hand, quotient space is more arbitrary. So like let's say like you have this kind of structure in the input space, and then you have this like a different letters or experiences, but then they don't have to follow the same structure, so they can be different, and so we need to find out whether people have kind of different structure in the quotient space. So that's the general idea. Yeah. Okay. So with these propositions, we should be able to try to sort of identify the structure for orbits and also quotient space. And so, but for the Qualia attributes, we can use topological data analysis, which is now becoming very common to analyze neuroscientific data. And so, then you can sort of look at topological properties of these orbits, but also if you want to have more geometric details, there's a technique called Gromov-Wasserstein optimal transport. So basically, when you you can do this in the representation, actual neural representation, but you can also ask human subjects to assess how two experiences are similar to each other. And then you get a rough estimate of sort of distance relations between all pairs of experiences. And then you can sort of make comparison between those two reported structures by two individuals. So that kind of analysis is also possible. But also when you want to look at the structure of Qualia signatures, so this could be, for example, you can show like a lot of animals, and then try to get their subjective sort of distance between all pairs of experiences or images, and then you can compare them. So that's another strategy to characterize. But here, the expectation is that there might be a lot of individual differences or cultural differences, in this kind of representation. So that's those are the predictions from this principal bundle decomposition. And also, to compute equivariances in artificial neural networks, but this principle also applies to actual brain neural networks. The idea is to compute basically when I introduced equivariance, you have two paths, encode and then transform versus encode, then transform, then encode. So you have two paths, and then this m is some sort of a distance measure, and so you can calculate how different the results are depending on how you do these two processes, and then you add the differences or distances for all group actions and for all relevant data sets. And then that way, if this is close to zero, this network is likely to have this G equivariance. So that's the idea. And so, for example, in this example, okay, so this is the original image. And then you can compare how activation patterns in the neural network changes if you rotate. So you can assess how much rotation equivariance this network has by comparing the output from this original stimulus or this stimulus. Or you can also compare the average of activation patterns from all these sort of transformed inputs. So that way, you can quantify how equivariant this network is. And then there's a really interesting empirical result from artificial neural networks experiment. So they assessed what kind of equivariance various vision neural networks have. So basically, each dot is a neural network, and for example, I don't know. So these are like all different kind of equivariances, but the main result is that neural networks that perform well on ImageNet task have more equivariance. So basically, like lower equivariance error. So that seems that suggests that like neural networks like have the kind of tendency to capture equivariances in the task data set, and that seems to lead to better performance. So there's something like really fundamental about capturing equivariances in the learning of neural networks. And so I expect that like similar thing must be happening in biological brains as well. Yeah. And okay, I still have time. And also, I also want to sort of speculate on how we can represent compositionality and hierarchical structure in qualia or in neural representations. So in my sort of previous sort of simple characterization, I kind of divided neural network or kind of total space in terms of visual modality or auditory modality. So I assume there's just one type of symmetry, but of course, when you take the whole neural network, it probably has like many types of symmetries in the system. So yeah, so we need to think about how to decompose the whole thing. Yeah, and also so also the order matters. So for example, let's say like one kind of transformation corresponds to a change in color, and then another transformation corresponds to the changing kind of orientation of the object, and then they are disentangled, so they are separable. Yeah, that's fine. But when you consider two translation and rotation, the order matters. So if you translate this, the an object to the right and then rotate, you reach this position. But if you rotate and then translate, you get a different position. So this kind of sort of ordering effect can be captured by semi-direct product. So that might be one way to do it. And eventually, like we may have like a hierarchical structure and so on. So that's something like we are currently discussing. Yeah. And but this kind of picture gives us some clarity about how to think about compositionality. So this like image comes from like early version of integrated information theory paper. And then, so in that paper, Tononi suggested, maybe we have this total experience, and then inside the total experience, you have, audition and vision, and within vision, you have like color, texture, and so, but they have this kind of like a nested structure. But we are thinking like, if we find a kind of nice mathematical way to decompose the whole experience into like vision, audition, and also maybe using something like semi-direct product, we may be able to decompose the whole experience in terms of different kind of symmetries. So that's the idea, but we don't know how to do it yet. But but we are kind of thinking about this now. Okay, so I talked about like many different things, but but there are many things we still need to think about. So for example, in biological brains or even in artificial neural networks, learned equivariances are probably they're not exactly equivariant. So they are always approximate equivariances. So in that case, it's kind of unclear to say, like, when something is translation invariant, can we, but not completely, like, can we say this is vision or half vision, or it's a little bit unclear. And also, early on, I mentioned that we need to look for an intrinsic property of a system to define a Qualia type. And so, but here we focused on symmetry because we thought it's reasonable to assume such a thing. But there are many other intrinsic properties. So, for example, like some properties in, like, in a graph and things like that are also intrinsic properties, and so, or some topological structures also intrinsic properties. So yeah, so symmetry is just one example, but there might be many other things we should consider. And also here, for simplicity, we assumed a very simple encoder, just feed-forward network to analyze. But in reality, the neural networks in the brain are complicated, and then they have feedback. So it's yeah. So we need to also think about how structure sort of dynamically changes over time through iteration. So that's something we haven't thought about. And also, maybe this is a very crucial philosophical point, which is that here I assume that, like, whenever there's symmetry, there's some like qualia, but actually, maybe symmetry is good for characterizing some intrinsic property of a neural network, but yeah, but it doesn't, like, really say which part corresponds to conscious experience. Like, some people think just very simple feed-forward neural network doesn't generate conscious experience. So in that sense, we don't, like, really, this framework doesn't say much about which part of the network should be conscious or unconscious. So this kind of thing needs to be incorporated in the future work. Yeah. And so, but at least, like, this framework gives us some motivation for various fields on like neuroscience, AI, and maybe hopefully mathematics as well. So one is that, yeah, so we can actually use this framework to see, like, which brain part has what kind of symmetry and so on, empirically. And in a way, neuroscientists have been, like, doing this for many years, like, without thinking in terms of this kind of framework. But yeah, but if we sort of systematically change the input and then look at how like population responses changes in different parts of the brain, we can, in principle, sort of characterize sort of symmetry properties of that neural processing. And also for AI and maybe for computational neuroscience, it seems like it's very natural and desirable thing for a neural network to learn equivariance, but I think we still need, like, more, like, more theory to understand why it's useful, maybe in terms of information theory and so on. So yeah, so and also, like, for example, predictive coding is often used as a model of how the brain learns, or how the brain makes inferences. Yeah, but with predictive coding style learning, do we get this kind of equivalences? That's also another interesting question. Yeah, and also, no, I talked about compositionality, in terms of decomposing symmetry, in terms of direct and semi-direct product, but there might be like useful way to formulate this. So yeah, I hope someone good with math can help us. Okay, yeah. So that's all from me, and this is just an advert. I recently became the editor-in-chief of General Artificial Intelligence and Consciousness. So if you have something interesting, please consider submitting to us. Okay, yeah, that's all, and thank you.